Hello guys, this is part 10 of the Workstation build. In this video, we'll be doing the first power on self-test since the unit has all the major components it needs to turn on. We'll do some initial BIOS settings and we're going to fine tune some RAM timings. So I have this hooked up to a TV in the living room just to test. Like I said, this is going to be the first power on self-test. We're just going to see if the system can post. So make sure to flip the switch in the back on the power supply to turn the power supply on. Otherwise, you'll press the power button, you'll realize, hey, why isn't my computer turning on? I've done that a few times, forget to flip the switch in the back. Oh, so I pressed power on. We got the Mellanox pop up. We got video. Now it's going to say, hey, some of your stuff has changed, like maybe the RAM or whatever, the CPU. You just press F1 to go to the BIOS or F2 to continue. You can see DRAM size is 131072 megabytes, so it sees all 128 gig of RAM. It sees our Xeon E5 1650v3 CPU. So the system boots. That's a good sign. And we have video out of our GPU. So I'm pressing F1 to enter the setup, which will be the UEFI BIOS. So I see that the mouse is working. I have that plugged into a front panel USB connector, so that is working just right. I'm looking over the Board Explorer to make sure that most of the components are showing up, and they are. This is our Samsung 860 Pro 1TB SSD. Now, it's pretty normal for the BIOS to not report an M.2 drive. Usually you have to be loaded in and have a driver loaded for most devices to see an M.2 drive, so that's completely normal. So I'm going to go through the settings, change a few things, make sure the date and time looks okay, make sure all the devices are showing up. And I know that the camera is out of focus. I do apologize for that. So I always make sure that SATA mode is an AHCI. This is important. Here you can also enable hot plug for various other SATA drives. I don't recommend this unless it's like a NAS where you're going to be swapping out drives while the OS is on. Here you can disable the onboard Ethernet controllers. I don't think I did it in this video, but I did it later because I'm going to be using the Mellanox NIC anyway. At the bottom you see we have HD audio controller. That's the onboard audio from Realtek. I went ahead and disabled that because I'm not going to be using it at all. So like I said, I was just going through each menu, just checking some things, making sure things are set right. Making sure it's in UEFI mode for booting, because I did install the OS via UEFI. So what I do with boot options is I disable all the other miscellaneous ones and just keep UEFI flash drive and UEFI hard drive. And then see how it says boot mode is on UEFI. That's good. The time looked correct for the time I was filming this video back in 2019, so I left that okay. So I went ahead and saved changes and reboot the computer back into the BIOS. So now I'm going to do the RAM timing. So I set the mode at the top to advanced. And we're going to go down to DRAM settings. So what I'm doing is I'm doing some fine tuning of the RAM timings. So the dilemma I have is the RAM is 2666 megahertz, and the memory controller on the CPU goes up to 2133. So the RAM will run at 2133, but it's going to use the higher cast latencies of 2666, and we don't want that. So what I did was I ran AIDA64 and got the SPD table of all the various timings at the different speeds, and I got the correct timings for the RAM for 2133. So I'm going in there and I am overwriting those timings to use the correct timings for 2133. So if you don't know what you're doing, don't mess with this. This is very, very, it could be very tedious and scary. You could break something. But what I'm doing is not particularly overclocking or anything illegal or bad. I'm basically using the manufacturer's given values straight off the SPD. The SPD is a chip on each RAM module that tells the motherboard what are all the correct timings for all the various speeds that the module supports. So obviously, RAM modules, they can downclock in speed if need be, depending on either the chipset of the motherboard and or the memory controller in the CPU. So I'm going through here and I'm setting our cast latency timings to 16, 16, 16, 38. Whereas if I would have left it at auto, it would have stayed clocked at 19, 19, 19 cast latency, even though it was running at the slower frequency of 2133. It would keep those high cast latency values. So you have to come in here and you have to do, it's called, what's the term of it? There's a term for coming in here and tweaking the timings. It's not really overclocking. It's not XMP or anything like that. It's just fine tuning your RAM timings. So what I do is I have the entire SPD timing layout from AIDA64. I copy that over to like a text document and I print it out. So I'm looking at that piece of paper and I'm matching up everything that I can. And if I don't see a value for a specific timing, I just leave it at auto. So you see the ones that I do change are the ones that are going to have a value entered, a number on the right-hand side. So you see I overrid the 19, 19, 19, 43 with 16, 16, 16, 38. And I don't know if you saw previously, but I changed the frequency to stay at 2133 because our memory controller and the CPU maxes out at that speed. Now when I go and upgrade Xeon, when I go to upgrade the Xeon in my computer, in the workstation, the new memory controller on the new Xeon goes up to, I believe, 2400 megahertz. So I'd have to go in there and set the RAM to 2400 megahertz, and I'd have to get the timings at 2400 megahertz and adjust them as needed. A lot of this stuff I'll keep on auto because I don't have the values for, but as much as the stuff that I have values for, I'm going to set them. So you see I set the timing for RFC, for RAS, CL, RCD, RP. This is what I like about MSI boards is adjusting RAM timings is not that hard. They really give you a lot of flexibility to really go out there and fine-tune stuff. I had a friend that was trying to tweak his RAM timings on a Gigabyte board, and the Gigabyte board just shit the bed. It didn't like he messed with the RAM timings, and the RAM timings wouldn't stick on the Gigabyte board. So I think MSI is better in that regard. So if you have to do some RAM timing tweaks to get better, latency, cast latency, MSI is good in that regard. Because I set these and I'll boot in to the OS and I will verify these with CPU Z or AIDA64 or whatever, and I'll verify that the new timings that I set is actually sticking to those timings. So you can actually verify that what you're doing is actually taking effect. So I'm paying very close attention to what I have on the notepad and making sure that matches up. So see, I have one for there, so I'm going to put it in. Now you put in a bad value or something like that, the system may still post and work, but you might have stability problems. So it doesn't hurt to also, like, after you adjust RAM timings, to maybe run an in-depth memtest 86, and also run stress testers such as AIDA64, where it will stress the RAM, the CPU, everything at once, and it will verify that even with your adjusted timings, the system is still stable and reliable. Now, if the values, they say that they're the same, I will just keep it on auto. But I try to change as much as I can that needs to be changed. So I'll exit saving changes. And will the system post? That is the important question. I've adjusted the timings. Will the system post? You screw something up, the system may not post, or it may throw a beep code, something like that, or it may go into like a boot loop. The good thing about this X99A workstation board is it has a BIOS reset button on the back I/O panel. So I could get like a toothpick and hold that down and reset the BIOS. You'll see that on a lot of higher end boards, to where, you know, it's a board that a lot of people use for overclocking, stuff like that, where they go in and overclock the CPU. They'll offer that BIOS reset button on the back. Oh, looks like it posted. Oh, look at that. And since we don't have an OS installed or anything like that, it's going to throw us back into the BIOS. But as you can see how it says DDR speed 2133? It's now sticking at that proper frequency. It was saying 2666 megahertz before, but it actually wasn't running at that because the memory controller and the CPU can't support that speed. So it's more like a glitch in the BIOS. It's completely normal for it to show that faster speed than the CPU memory controller in the BIOS. So I'm booting up the system again. So I'm now booting into memtest 86. And I'll let memtest 86 run, and we'll verify that the RAM passes. Here's the important thing. Before you adjust your RAM timings, run memtest 86 and make sure that all your RAM passes and all the slots pass. Then go and adjust the timings. Then run memtest again. Memtest fails after you adjust the timings. There's something wrong with your timings, and there's a system stability problem. So you don't want to do this after the fact, because if you do, you're going to think maybe you're not going to know if it's the RAM or it's the timings. So I already ran memtest 86 before, and all the RAM passed with flying colors. So I know the RAM's good. I know the system's good. So if memtest fails now, I'll know that it's a timing issue. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this video.